The fallen star. The vicious crack of Nyx's flagship splitting in two echoed through the empty void of space. Alarms blared as emergency systems failed one by one, the ship's AI voice growing increasingly distorted. Nyx, Supreme Commander of the Vexary fleet, once celebrated as the Midnight Blade, now clung to the shattered remains of her captain's chair as her vessel plummeted toward the unassuming blue planet below. "Status report," she demanded, her voice steady despite the chaos. The ship's remaining console flickered weakly. Hull integrity at 9%. Life support failing. Collision with planetary surface imminent, the AI responded, its voice slowing to an eerie drawl before cutting out completely. Nyx's silver eyes narrowed as she watched the planet grow larger through the fractured viewscreen. Earth. A backwater world barely worth a footnote in the great archives of the Vexary Empire. And now, it would be her grave. She had never tasted defeat before today. For 3 centuries, she had conquered worlds, crushed rebellions, and expanded the Vexary dominion across 12 star systems. Her name alone had been enough to end wars before they began. But today, betrayal had found her. General Thalax, her second-in-command, had orchestrated a mutiny so perfect she hadn't seen it coming until energy torpedoes were tearing through her ship. The vessel screamed as it tore through Earth's atmosphere, superheated metal peeling away like burning paper. Nyx braced herself, activating her exosuit's protective field. The crash came with a deafening roar, the impact sending her flying through the command deck and into darkness. Theo Russell had always preferred machines to people. After 15 years as a combat engineer in war zones across 3 continents, he'd retreated to the mountains of Colorado, where his only companions were the vehicles he repaired and the occasional deer that wandered past his workshop. The cabin he'd built with his own hands stood as a testament to his desire for solitude, remote, self-sufficient, and peaceful. Until the sky split open. The sound came first, a thunderous boom that shook dust from the rafters of his workshop. Theo stepped outside just in time to see a blazing object tear through the clouds and slam into the valley below, leaving a smoking trail in its wake. "Well, that's not something you see every day," he muttered, reaching for his emergency pack. Whatever had crashed was about 3 miles from his cabin, deep in the forest. Probably a satellite or a piece of space junk, he reasoned. Still, he grabbed his rifle before heading out. 15 years in combat zones had taught him to prepare for anything. The trek through the forest took him less than an hour. The crash site was impossible to miss, a half-mile-long gouge torn through the earth, trees snapped like twigs, and at the end, a smoking mass of twisted metal unlike anything he'd ever seen. Definitely not a satellite. Theo circled the wreckage cautiously, testing the air with a portable sensor he'd kept from his military days. No radiation, no obvious chemical hazards. Just the acrid smell of burnt metal and something else, something alien. He was halfway around the perimeter when he spotted it, a figure pulling itself from the wreckage. Tall, at least 7 feet, with skin like polished obsidian that seemed to absorb the sunlight rather than reflect it. The being wore what looked like armor, sleek and almost organic in its design, now damaged and sparking in places. Theo raised his rifle, not taking aim but ready. "That's far enough," he called out. The figure turned, revealing a face that was surprisingly humanoid, though with features too sharp and perfect to be earthly. Silver eyes fixed on him with predatory intensity. "Human," the being said, the word clear despite an accent that made it sound almost musical. "This territory is now claimed by the Vexary Empire. Kneel before your new sovereign." Theo barked out a laugh. "Lady, I don't know what planet you're from, but you just crashed your fancy spaceship into my backyard. You're in no position to be making demands." The alien's eyes narrowed. She straightened to her full height, but Theo didn't miss the way her legs trembled with the effort. "I am Supreme Commander Nyx of the Vexary Dominion. I have conquered 12 star systems and brought hundreds of species to heal. You will show respect. I'm Theo Russell of Nowhere Important, and I was about to offer you medical assistance, but if you'd rather stand there bleeding and giving speeches, be my guest. For a moment, they stared at each other, neither willing to back down. Then, with a soft hiss, the alien's legs gave out. She collapsed to one knee, though her pride kept her from falling completely. "Damn it," Theo muttered, lowering his rifle and moving toward her. "Look, I've got a first aid kit, and I'm guessing you've got injuries that need attention. How about we postpone the whole conquering Earth thing until you're not about to pass out?" Nyx looked up at him, confusion briefly crossing her face. "You would aid an enemy?" "You're not my enemy yet," Theo said, kneeling beside her. "Just someone who crashed nearby and needs help. Now, can you walk, or do I need to carry you?" For a long moment, she simply stared at him, those silver eyes assessing, calculating. Then, with obvious reluctance, she nodded once. "I will accept your temporary assistance, human." "Theo," he corrected. "And you're Nyx, right? Not human, or earthling, or whatever. Names, not species." "Theo," she said finally, testing the name. "Very well. I require shelter and basic repair facilities. My exosuit's self-healing protocols are damaged. Well, I've got a cabin and a workshop. Not sure how useful they'll be for alien tech, but it's better than sitting in the woods waiting for wildlife to find you." It took nearly 2 hours to get her back to the cabin, with Nyx refusing to be carried despite her injuries. By the time they reached the clearing, night had fallen, and stars twinkled in the clear mountain sky. "Those are different," Nyx said suddenly, looking up. "Different from what?" Theo asked, helping her up the porch steps. "The stars from my homeworld. They form different patterns here." For a moment, something like vulnerability crossed her face. "I have never been so far from Vexery space before." Theo pushed open the door and guided her to his workshop. "Well, welcome to Earth. It's not much, but it's home." He cleared a space on his workbench, pushing aside engine parts and tools to make room for his unexpected guest. Nyx sat awkwardly, her tall frame dwarfing the human furniture. Her armor, or exosuit, as she called it, was clearly sophisticated technology, but Theo could recognize damage when he saw it. Several plates were cracked, and a viscous silver fluid leaked from joints and seams. "Can you remove any of this?" he asked, gesturing to her armor. Nyx hesitated, then pressed a sequence on her wrist guard. With a soft hiss, sections of the armor retracted, revealing more of her obsidian skin beneath. The areas where the armor had been damaged showed injuries, not blood as Theo had expected, but more of that silver fluid, seeping from what appeared to be wounds. "I require certain elements to facilitate healing," she said, her voice noticeably weaker now. "Primarily platinum, osmium, and a substance you likely call mercury." Theo whistled. "Lady, 2 of those are precious metals, and the third is toxic to humans. Not exactly things I keep around for first aid." Nyx's silver eyes fixed on him. "Without them, my cellular regeneration will be significantly impaired." "Let me see what I've got," Theo said, turning to his collection of parts and materials. Years of scavenging and hoarding had left him with an eclectic inventory. He returned with a small box of electronic components. "These old circuit boards contain small amounts of platinum. And I've got some mercury switches from antique thermostats. Not much, but it's something." Nyx examined the offerings with surprise. "You possess these materials yet consider them scrap. Your species is wasteful." "Or resourceful," Theo countered. "Depends on how you look at it." He watched as Nyx carefully extracted the elements she needed from the components, her fingers moving with precision despite her injuries. She pressed the materials directly to her wounds, and Theo stared in fascination as the silver fluid seemed to absorb them, the injuries slowly beginning to close. "So," he said, breaking the silence, "want to tell me why a Supreme Commander ended up crashing on a backwater planet all alone?" Nyx's expression hardened. "Betrayal. My second-in-command orchestrated a mutiny. My loyal crews were executed, and I was left for dead. Rough day at the office, Theo commented, earning a sharp look from the alien. The Vexry Empire does not tolerate failure. I have been deemed unworthy of my rank, my title, my very existence. Her voice remained steady, but Theo didn't miss the bitterness that edged her words. And what happens now? Now, Nick said, looking around the humble workshop, I am stranded on a primitive world with no fleet, no resources, and no standing. That makes two of us, Theo said with a wry smile. Except for the fleet part. Never had one of those. For the first time, Nix looked at him with something other than disdain or suspicion. You speak as one who understands loss of position. Theo shrugged. Former combat engineer. Served in enough war zones to last a lifetime. Now I fix engines and avoid people. He gestured around the isolated cabin. Not exactly Supreme Commander material, but it works for me. Something like understanding passed between them then, a mutual recognition of souls who had fallen from grace. Outside, the night deepened, and somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled, a sound that made Nix tense immediately. Just local wildlife, Theo assured her. Nothing to worry about. Nix nodded, though she remained alert. Your world is loud. And organic. That's one way to put it, Theo agreed. Listen, you should rest. The spare room is small, but it's yours if you want it. We can figure out next steps in the morning. Nix hesitated, clearly unaccustomed to accepting help. I accept your offer, Theo. As he showed her to the spare room, Theo couldn't help but wonder what he'd gotten himself into. An alien warrior, a crashed spaceship, and talk of a galactic empire. Not exactly what he'd expected when he'd chosen isolation in the mountains. But then again, maybe this was exactly what he needed, a reminder that even at the edge of nowhere, the universe had a way of finding you. Rising from ashes. Dawn broke over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Theo stood on his porch, coffee in hand, watching as Nix emerged from the woods. She had risen before him, her tall figure slipping silently from the cabin to explore her surroundings. Now she moved with greater strength than the previous day, though her movement still lacked the fluid grace he suspected was natural to her. Your planet's atmosphere is dense, she commented, climbing the porch steps. The gravity is stronger than I am accustomed to. Is that why you look like you're carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders? Theo asked, offering her a mug of coffee. Nix accepted it cautiously, sniffing the dark liquid before taking a sip. Her face contorted in disgust. This is bitter. It's an acquired taste, Theo said with a chuckle. Like most things worth having. They sat in silence for a time, watching as the mountains emerged from the morning mist. Finally, Nix spoke. I must return to my ship. There are components I need, technology that cannot fall into human hands. Planning to rebuild and fly home? Theo asked. Nix's silver eyes fixed on the horizon. The ship is beyond repair. But there are communication systems, weapons, and technology that could be salvaged. In the wrong hands, they could destabilize your world. And in your hands? I merely wish to survive, she said quietly. And perhaps, one day, to reclaim what was taken from me. Theo nodded slowly. I'll help you, on one condition. No conquest talk. You're a guest on Earth, not an invader. Nix appeared to consider this. Agreed. For now. They spent the morning hiking back to the crash site. In daylight, the wreckage looked even more alien, sleek black metal with pulsing blue veins running through it like a circulatory system. Parts of the ship still hummed with energy, while others lay dead and cold. Your technology. It's almost organic, Theo observed, running a hand over a section of hull. Vexry technology blends mechanical and biological elements, Nix explained, pressing her palm against a panel that immediately lit up in response to her touch. Our ships are partially alive, bonded to their commanders. So when your ship crashed, I felt it, Nix confirmed. Every break, every fracture. For hours, they worked to salvage what they could. Theo was amazed at the advanced technology, components no larger than his thumb that could store more data than all of Earth's computers combined. Nix was equally impressed by his ingenuity, his ability to adapt human tools to work with alien materials. By midday, they had recovered several intact systems, including a small communications array and what Nix described as a molecular reconstructor, a device that could, theoretically, repair her damaged exosuit. We should hurry, Nix said suddenly, her head snapping up. We are not alone. More of your kind? Theo asked, hand instinctively moving to his rifle. Hunters, she replied, her voice tight. The Empire would never leave me alive, let alone allow your species access to our technology. As if on cue, a high-pitched whine filled the air. Theo looked up to see a sleek craft descending through the clouds, smaller than Nix's ship but clearly of the same design. Run, Nix commanded, grabbing the salvaged technology. Now. They sprinted through the forest, the sound of the hunter ship growing louder behind them. Theo led the way, taking paths only a local would know, ducking under low branches and leaping over fallen logs. Despite her injuries, Nix kept pace, her long legs eating up the distance. They were halfway back to the cabin when the first shot came, a blast of energy that scorched the tree beside Theo's head. Keep moving. Nix shouted, pushing him forward. I will slow them down. Before Theo could protest, she had whirled around, drawing a weapon from her armor that expanded into a staff of crackling energy. 3 figures emerged from the trees, Vexry hunters in full combat gear, their faces hidden behind visored helmets. Commander Nix, one called out, voice distorted by a translator. By order of the Council, you are to be terminated. Nix's response was swift and violent. She launched herself at the hunters, her staff cutting through the air with deadly precision. For a moment, Theo stood transfixed, watching as she fought with a skill and ferocity that reminded him she was not human, not bound by human limitations. But there were 3 hunters, all fully armed and uninjured. Despite her prowess, Nix was quickly overwhelmed. A blast struck her side, sending her stumbling to one knee. Theo didn't hesitate. He raised his rifle and fired, the shot striking one hunter square in the visor. The alien stumbled backward, more surprised than injured, but it was enough distraction for Nix to regain her footing. Get to the cabin. Theo shouted, firing again to provide cover. They retreated step by step, Nix fighting defensively while Theo picked his shots carefully. The cabin came into view, and with it, a chance. Theo had survived 15 years in combat zones not by being the strongest or the fastest, but by being prepared. Inside, he ordered, laying down a final burst of covering fire. Once inside, he slammed the door and activated a switch hidden beneath his workbench. Metal shutters slid down over the windows, and a low hum filled the air as an electromagnetic field activated. Proximity mines, he explained to Nix's questioning look. And a few other surprises I installed after my last tour. Old habits. Your preparation is unexpected, Nix admitted, pressing a hand to her wounded side. Though perhaps not sufficient against Vexry technology. Maybe not, Theo agreed. But we've got something they don't. What is that? Home field advantage, he said with a grim smile. And I'm guessing they don't know much about Earth. They worked quickly, Theo connecting the salvaged molecular reconstructor to his generator while Nix prepared for the coming assault. He couldn't help but notice how she moved with new purpose now, her earlier defeat giving way to a cold determination. Why not just give yourself up, he asked suddenly. Why fight when the odds are so stacked against you? Nix paused, silver eyes reflecting the dim light of the cabin. Because surrender is not redemption, she said finally. And I have much to atone for. What do you mean? I have conquered worlds, Theo. I have brought species to heel in the name of the Empire. I believed in our superiority, our right to rule. She looked down at her hands. Now I find myself dependent on the mercy of a species I would have subjugated without hesitation. And that changes things? Theo asked. It changes everything, she replied quietly. Their conversation was cut short by the sound of movement outside. The hunters had found them. Theo checked his makeshift defenses one last time, then positioned himself at a reinforced window slit. They will not expect me to fight alongside a human, Nyx said, activating her staff. We can use that surprise. The first hunter triggered one of Theo's proximity mines, the explosion sending them flying backward. The second and third split up, circling the cabin, looking for weak points. Nyx tensed, ready to spring into action. Wait, Theo cautioned. Let them come to us. The attack, when it came, was coordinated and brutal. Energy weapons tore through the cabin's outer walls, and one hunter crashed through a window, rolling to a stop inside. Nyx engaged immediately, her staff connecting with the hunter's armor with a sound like thunder. Theo fired at the second hunter, forced to duck as return fire nearly took his head off. The cabin became a battleground, furniture splintering and walls cracking under the onslaught. Theo found himself fighting back-to-back with Nyx, human and alien united against a common enemy. We cannot win this way, Nyx shouted over the chaos. Then we changed the game, Theo replied, reaching for a device on his belt. Cover your eyes. He threw the device, a military-grade flash grenade, directly at the hunters. The explosion of light and sound disoriented them just long enough for Nyx to strike. She moved like lightning, her staff connecting with vulnerable points in their armor. One hunter went down, then another. The third, the leader, backed away, raising a hand to its helmet. This is not over, traitor, it hissed at Nyx before activating what Theo recognized as a teleportation device. In a flash of light, the hunter vanished, leaving only damaged equipment and an unconscious comrade behind. Silence fell over the ruined cabin. Theo slumped against a wall, exhaustion washing over him. Nyx stood motionless in the center of the room, her staff still humming with energy. They will send more, she said finally, her voice flat. Probably, Theo agreed. But we'll be ready. Nyx looked at him, genuine confusion crossing her features. Why do you continue to aid me? I have brought destruction to your home. I have endangered your life. Theo considered this, then shrugged. Maybe because everyone deserves a second chance. Even alien commanders with a superiority complex. A sound escaped Nyx, something between a laugh and a sigh. You are a strange human, Theo Russell. And you're learning, he replied, getting to his feet. That's a start. In the days that followed, they repaired what they could of the cabin and prepared for the inevitable return of the hunters. Nyx worked with the salvaged molecular reconstructor, slowly healing her damaged exosuit and, in turn, herself. Theo taught her about Earth, its cultures, its history, its resilience in the face of adversity. Your species is fractured, Nyx observed one evening as they watched the news on Theo's ancient television. You fight among yourselves constantly. We're complicated, Theo admitted. Flawed. But we keep trying. In the Empire, such division would not be tolerated. And yet here you are, Theo pointed out, betrayed by your own kind. Nyx fell silent, contemplating this. Finally, she spoke again. Perhaps perfection is not found in uniformity, but in the strength to rise after falling. Theo smiled. Now you're getting it. As the mountain winter approached, bringing with it snow and isolation, they established a routine. Each morning, they trained together, Nyx teaching Theo her combat techniques, Theo showing her how to adapt to Earth's gravity and atmosphere. Each evening, they planned and prepared, knowing that somewhere in the stars, the Empire was not forgetting. I was wrong about your world, Nyx admitted one night as they sat by the fire. It is not primitive. It is resilient. Like its people. High praise from the Supreme Commander, Theo said with a smile. I am no longer that person, she replied, her silver eyes reflecting the flames. That title belonged to someone who believed in conquest above all else. And now? Now, Nick said, looking out at the snow-covered mountains, I believe in rising. In becoming something new from the ashes of what was lost. Theo nodded, understanding all too well. Then welcome to Earth, Nix. It's a good place to start again. As they sat together, alien and human, the stars wheeled overhead, different from the ones Nix had known, but beautiful in their own right. And somewhere among them, an empire waited, unaware that its fallen champion was rising once more, not as a conqueror, but as something far more dangerous, a defender with nothing left to lose.